Welcome back. I'm David Gura. President Trump yet again defending EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, whose expenses have come under scrutiny. The president saying in a tweet Saturday, quote, while security spending was somewhat more than his predecessor, Scott Pruitt has received death threats because of his bold actions at EPA. Record clean air and water while saving USA billions of dollars. Rent was about market rate. Travel expenses okay. Scott is doing a great job. A growing number of lawmakers are calling for Scott Pruitt to resign, including 3 Republicans. This, as the Wall Street Journal reported, the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, told his boss, President Trump, Pruitt has to go. Joining me now is Ken Vogel, New York Times political reporter, Jason Johnson, MSNBC political contributor, politics editor at theroot.com, and Lynn Sweet with me as well, Chicago Sun-Times Washington bureau chief. Lynn, let me start with you. I've traveled to Washington, stayed in an Airbnb on Capitol Hill, and I must confess, I've had trouble finding anything near $50 a night at or around Eastern Market. What do you make of the president's defense via Twitter of Scott Pruitt?
Well, what the president does is set the tone and ethics for his administration, and the president said in the tweet he doesn't care about any of these allegations that have arose out of reporting, sound reporting. Now, the issue isn't so much, I think, as whether or not $50 is the proper price or not. That can be established one way or the other. It's just the judgment that went into going into a deal with somebody who's in the lobbying business, period, because the appearance of impropriety is always at issue when you have someone. Then there are the stories that he didn't leave when he said he would, and the landlords got mad at him and changed the locks. So it wasn't just this one thing of the $50 a night, because you have to look at this whole picture here, and there are multiple lapses. But what I make of it is that President Trump doesn't seem particularly to care. What we will watch for is not just if congressmen, Republicans in general, say he should go. It's whether or not any of the leadership says that, and whether or not there's a congressional inquiry as part of oversight of his agency.
Ken Vogel, let me turn to you. Your paper has done some fine reporting here on what Scott Pruitt has done, helming the EPA, all that he's managed to roll back. I go back to the president's tweet there about record clean air and water, but we're getting a portrait in fine focus here of Scott Pruitt at the EPA. On the one side, you've got this almost paranoid complex about security, private phone booth, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, he's made some strides here, rolling back some pretty significant regulations.
Yeah, that's the inherent conflict that we're looking at here, David. He has been among the most aggressive of President Trump's cabinet secretaries in pursuing this deregulatory agenda that is in many ways at the heart of what Trump and certainly his most conservative supporters, those who are within the Republican Party and the conservative movement writ large, have wanted from a Republican president. They're getting that from Trump, and they're really getting it from the EPA, and that's in an area where they really have a lot of interest. That is regulations related to the environment and clean water and clean air and the like. On the other hand, you have him running up this impressive track record of, if not violations, certainly ways in which he has gone outside of what is expected and what the rules say that a cabinet secretary has to do when it comes to approving spending, to the point where we reported on Thursday and Friday that there were 5 people, high-ranking officials within the EPA, including Trump political appointees, who had flagged these concerns to Pruitt and even to the White House, and those people were all either reassigned, demoted, or put on administrative leave. The fact that these concerns got to the White House months ago and the White House did nothing is an indication of just what Lynn talked about, that President Trump is willing to trade the former thing that I just talked about, Pruitt's success in rolling back regulations, for any of these types of questions that have arisen about his ethics and spending.
Jason Johnson, you look at these 3 branches of federal government in concert, and you see Congress pushing back here on the White House. There are now 3 Republicans saying that Scott Pruitt should go. But I look back on the conversation about trade. You had Republicans there who said that the first proposed tariffs here were falling. It didn't seem to bother the White House at all. What does it say about the way that those branches are working together at this point, that the White House seems to be ignoring what many members of Congress are saying?
Well, I don't think this is different. The messaging out of this White House, David, from the very beginning has always been complicated. When Rex Tillerson was in office, he would say one thing about international relations and trade, and you would hear something else from Trump. Trump would tweet this, and then you hear something different from a member of Congress. There doesn't appear to be much policy coordination. There doesn't appear to be much philosophical coordination with what's going on, and there doesn't seem to be any effort to change it. Every single time we're told that, okay, John Kelly's gonna lock down down on this, or Sarah Huckabee Standard, she's going to be the final message on it, we end up hearing something different. So it's not surprising whether we're talking about trade, whether we're talking about the environment, whether we're talking about Russia, that we're always getting conflicting messages out of this White House. And it makes it very difficult for the hardworking civil servants of all parties in government to do their job if they don't know what the real message is.
Lynn, Jason Johnson just brought up John Kelly. Let me ask you about that piece in the Washington Post. Just ask you about John Kelly's position in general. That piece describing what it calls the downward arc of John Kelly's career in the White House. Of course, the president tweeting about that Washington Post piece. The Washington Post is far more fiction than fact. Story after story is made-up garbage, more like a poorly written novel than good reporting. I'm going to quibble with that, just reading one line from that piece. John Kelly is, quote, the latest high-profile example of a West Wing Icarus swept into President Trump's orbit only to be singed and cast low. Lynn Sweet, how is John Kelly's position within the White House as you see it, covering the White House day in and day out?
Well, the issue isn't that John Kelly flew too close to the sun. That is not the issue. The issue is that Donald Trump, in this unfolding, evolving management of the White House that he is engaged in, doesn't want a conventional chief of staff. So that is the issue. It's not really so much if John Kelly is in or out. I don't know how anyone could not have their role change more or less. You know, you could do more, you could do less, but Trump doesn't want a stable situation in where you empower one person to do what are the traditional duties of the chief of staff, and that's what we're seeing unfold here. So it isn't so much that I think Kelly told him that Pruitt should go. Clearly, you know, the president can make these personnel decisions and not go with his chief of staff decision. The fundamental question is that John Kelly has not figured out a way to be a chief of staff with a president who wants to govern by morning tweet, to set the agenda, announce personnel change, and without notifying the Pentagon and having a procedure and process, talk about sending the military to the border. So it would be hard. We are seeing a new model of a chief of staff, and John Kelly, for this point in history, is kind of caught in this new structure that Trump wants to place in, meaning one day he kind of wants a traditional chief of staff, and one day he doesn't.
Jason Johnson, last question to you. We had these town halls about gun violence yesterday. You and I have had occasion here over these last few weeks to talk about gun policy or heading into the midterms. You made a comment about the Georgia governor's race. I know you want to clarify something that you said just a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You know, we were talking about whether or not the Parkland kids' message about gun control was really going to resonate, and I think it has. You can look at the Georgia governor's race where Stacey Evans was attacked by one of her opponents because she had a B+ rating at one point from the NRA. I mistakenly said A+, it was a B+. And the moment that attack came out, the Evans campaign is like, no, we have a D now. We're not close with the NRA, we have a D. And what's interesting about this, David, is 3 years ago, nobody would have cared. The fact that you have red state Democrats who are attacking each other over NRA ratings is a reflection of the fact that gun control has now become a hot button issue. It's not just going to be associated with Parkland kids. It's going to become a wedge issue for Democrats in blue states, red states, and purple states throughout the fall. And it's something everybody's got to be concerned about now.
All right, so bottom line, she has a D rating. Jason Johnson, thank you very much. Ken Vogel, Lynn Sweet, thanks for your time as well.